Welcome to the first Attendable Showcase. I'm Catherine Grunier.
And I'm Sarah Florence.
Having worked together for a number of years, we joined forces in June 2020 with the joint desire to create virtual and in-person events that everyone wants to and can attend. In our Attendable Showcase series, we'll speak to clients and suppliers to share our learnings and best practice from the events that we deliver. We believe that sharing knowledge and information is the best way to increase awareness of accessible and inclusive events and how you can deliver them.
Back in December 2021, we helped the Centre for Access to Football in Europe team deliver their virtual 4th international conference, and I caught up with Managing Director Joanna Deagle to talk through the event planning and delivery. Welcome to Joanna Deagle from Centre for Access to Football in Europe, and thank you so much for joining our Attendable Showcase. Jo and her colleague Jochen reached out to Attendable back in July 2021 for help to make their 4th international conference virtual and accessible. Jo, would you like to tell us about what you do at Cafe and how you came to reach out to us for your conference in December?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks for inviting us to this today. So I'm Jo, the Managing Director of Cafe, Centre for Access to Football in Europe, and we are an NGO that uses football as a catalyst to improve the rights of disabled people. So we try to use football as a way of changing perceptions, removing stigmas, and creating accessible environments so that disabled people can attend as spectators, volunteers, can be employed within the sporting landscape, and take their rightful places in those games, but also that trickles out onto a wider effect and impact on society as well. So we are a UEFA football and social responsibility partner and a FIFA consultant. So we work very closely with those two organisations, their member associations and clubs, to provide guidance, support, trainings and information to make sure that the matchday experience is more accessible for disabled spectators. And then we work with disabled spectators themselves, getting their feedback on their experiences, learning from them what are the barriers that still remain and how we can come to solutions to remove those barriers. And then as part of our work, every 3 years, we hold an international conference to bring all of those stakeholders together to learn from each other, share best practice, challenge each other as well, and to motivate each other to continue to, keep pushing for greater access for disabled people. So usually it would be in person. We'd be spending 2 to 3 days in a stadium, having panel sessions, speakers, etc., and then some networking events throughout as well. But obviously the pandemic hit, and we were due to have the conference in 2021 as part of that 3-year cycle. Mm-hmm. And we were thinking about, should we postpone it until people can travel more easily again? But we also knew that the pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on disabled people. So we thought, no, actually, we really need to pursue with this and go online, which we'd never done before for the conference. And but this also gave us the opportunity to open it up to more people as well on an international scale, which is what Cafe is trying to do as well, is to go outside of Europe and work with organisations in other parts of the world. And it meant for people that weren't able to travel at that time, they could also join as well. So we started looking to online platforms, and that's how we found you.
Fantastic. Well, actually, platforms is a good place to pause, because that's my first question for you, Jo. So having an accessible platform to deliver the conference was important to your team. We proposed Virtual Conference Manager. But can you tell me about some of the findings that I know that you guys looked into some other platforms before reaching out to us. Can you tell me about sort of some of the findings, some of the things that you found in the platforms that you looked into?
Yeah, so as you said there, Sarah, accessibility is the most important thing for us. If we're an organisation that is trying to make football and other sports more accessible for disabled people, we need to practice what we preach. So when we were organising this conference, everything came back to, is this accessible? Will it create a barrier? So we spoke with a number of platforms, and some of them we'd seen from conferences that we'd attended or people had introduced us to them. And our first question was always, about accessibility and the WCAG compliance, etc. And a lot of the people we spoke to didn't know what we were talking about. And when we asked about accessibility, they thought, was it accessible for people all over the world to attend in that way of accessing something rather than around barriers, removing barriers for disabled people? And there were some platforms that had some amazing features. So one of them said that they could actually build a virtual stadium for us to all be in, and they could build, make sure all of the people walking around the venue were representative of society, so that we would see disabled people within those figures as well around the conference. And that was all very exciting. But it still came down to, are these features accessible? And we spoke to a number of organizations, and they just weren't able to answer our questions on that really in a satisfactory way. And we wanted to have confidence in that aspect of our conference as well. So we then, through a member of our board, were informed about Attendable. We knew you were working on another conference as well, and had done in the past, where accessibility is really key to them as well. So we had confidence that this was something that was going to work for us. And then when we spoke with you, your passion for accessibility really shone through, and that was something really key to us as well. It was really nice to find an organisation that really, really cared about accessibility and recognised that there are so many barriers, including in the online world, that need to be removed. And it was just really nice to find an organisation that we were going to be working with really, really closely over several months that had that shared ambition.
Yeah, it's finding an accessible virtual platform for events is not easy. And it's something that Catherine and I, probably every other week, we're having a demo from a different platform, trying to sort of ascertain just how far along their accessible journey they are. We did end up, as you mentioned, we ended up recommending Virtual Conference Manager, a platform that wraps around Microsoft Teams. We chose it. I mean, it ticked a lot of the boxes. We've used it before. For, as you mentioned, for another conference. It ticked the accessibility box, and also from a budget point of view, it ticked your budget box at the time as well. And it didn't necessarily sing and dance like some of the other platforms do, but it gave you the experience that you wanted your attendees to have, and it was accessible to everybody, which at the end of the day was the main goal. There were also some nice bits. The gamification worked really well, didn't it? So being able to share points for people when they attended sessions, and a bit of tracking against countries to see how many countries were being represented. It just sort of added a little bit to the event as well. So we have to, obviously, accessibility was important, and we've touched on it, but there were quite a lot of requirements from your side. Do you want to just run me through some of those?
Yeah, so we had a list of requirements from our previous conferences, and then also feedback from those conferences where we hadn't provided some access requirements before. So we knew this time around we had to. And then we had to think about the learnings through the pandemic, where we'd attended online meetings or done more research into this about what our audience might require. And then obviously, as we actually started the registrations, we were asking people about their access requirements. And that was also really key to understand if we actually needed to invest in every single thing we'd thought of, or if there were some things we needed to focus on more. So translations were key for us. Whilst a lot of the speakers we had who work in football spoke English, we knew that a lot of our audience weren't so familiar with English, or wouldn't be able to follow the conference so fluidly if it were just in English. So translations were really, really, or interpretations were really, really key for us. And so we had language translations from English into French, Spanish, German, Russian, and Polish, and that was largely based on our stakeholders and what languages we knew from previous conference we would need to cover. And then we had captions as well, international sign language. We'd never done this before, but we wanted to do it for this conference. We tried audio description of the videos that were being showed that were largely visual. And this actually came back from feedback from a participant in our conference in 2018, that just the visual aspects of the conference weren't being conveyed in an audible format. So that was something we were keen to do this time. And then there were other little bits like sending the presentations in advance. And then thanks to you, actually, with our speaker briefings, when we were preparing for the conference, we made sure that speakers knew to describe themselves when they were being introduced. And then also to describe, if they were presenting something, if there was a photo or an image, that they described that image to the audience when they were speaking. So yeah, there was quite a long list of different requirements, and we're still gathering feedback on on this conference, actually, to see if there's anything we did miss that we need to think about next time.
Yeah, I mean, we from an attendable point of view, we've dealt with captions, we've dealt with international sign language before. The complexity of the languages was definitely a challenge. We ended up using Interprefy to support that, and I think it worked really, really well, but it was definitely a level of complexity, and sort of explaining to speakers and attendees how the interpretation works, I think is key. It's all very well to have the accessibility on an event, but it's really important also to tell people how to gain access to those elements. We sort of regularly shared housekeeping slides and put messages in the chat as well to help people find those as well. We found really interesting with your conference, Joe, was the requirement to use audio description. And when you reach out to suppliers, and the sort of understanding what content needs to have the description and what isn't. So in our minds was any kind of video content or any sort of visual graphic content. But actually, when we spoke to the suppliers, they sort of highlighted that actually it's when there's a full, a long amount of content, when it's sort of small bits and pieces, it often doesn't help. It's too interrupting. Whereas on the longer videos, so I think in the end we played it out on we had it on a couple of videos, didn't we?
That's right, yeah.
So I think that's a really, really good learning from us as well, actually, about how to use audio description in an event, which was really great. We used a couple of different suppliers for your conference, and we used Red Bee for our captions. We had live captions, and they translated into the French, German, Spanish, Polish, and Russian as well. And then we used Sign Solution for our international sign language interpreters as well. We just sort of also thinking about from an accessibility point of view, you mentioned it a bit before, but it's not just about the attendee experience, but it's also about the speaker experience. So from a production point of view, we brought in the speakers in via Zoom, because Zoom is one of the more accessible platforms, and a lot of people are quite used to using Zoom. So we were bringing them in via Zoom, and then vision mixing them into the lovely sort of the branded output that everyone saw on the conference. And I think it's really important to consider the speaker experience as well as the end user experience as well. And as you said, a lot of that information gets conveyed in our speaker briefings. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's absolutely correct. And in previous cafe conferences, a lot of the sessions were led by cafe staff. And this time we actually wanted to make sure that not only were they're more disabled people speaking at the conference and attending and listening, but also that they were moderating the sessions as well. So that was, as you said, really key where the speaker briefings came in, that they were also done for the moderators as well. And that was really, really key to make sure that all aspects of the conference in terms of preparation as well were accessible.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think actually sometimes without those briefings, there are things that you don't even think about. You know, how are you going to share the questions with someone who can't access the chat, for example, you know? So all those elements were discussed in the briefing, so that when we come to the live session, everyone's comfortable. Other speakers within the panel can support the moderator if they need it. So that's from a Attendable point of view. That's always something that we like to do, to sort of meet everyone in advance and find out what requirements they have. So moving on from the accessibility onto content, and when we sort of first spoke to you guys, you had quite an extensive agenda that you wanted to pack into your conference. Talk me through some of the different sessions that you guys had and the formats. Maybe like in the first instance, what you thought it was going to be like, and then we can talk about how we sort of refined it a little bit.
Yeah, I think we were a bit too excited at the start, and we tried to cram in a 2-day in-person event into a 1.5-day virtual event. And so as we started sharing the agenda with you very kindly and politely showed us that actually this was way too much, and we were being a bit too ambitious with how much we were trying to cram in. And we soon realized that actually with this going online, we need to make sure that there are much more regular breaks, that the sessions are a bit shorter as well, and that we integrate different ways of keeping that engagement up. So we remained close to our usual conferences in having a keynote speaker and panel sessions, presentations, but we tried to make it focus more on the panel sessions where there were more discussions rather than just one person presenting, because that's just much more easier to follow when it's online. And then we used the chat function to really engage the discussions whilst the panel session was going on. And that was also used for the questions at the end of each session. But even sometimes there wasn't time for questions, or we obviously couldn't cover all of the questions. But it meant that even through the panel session, there were people talking, adding comments, liking things that people had shared. And we used that chat function as well to encourage people to go onto social media and share what we were talking about and discussing, or, as you said before, reminding people how to access certain elements such as the language interpretation or the captioning. So we had a mixture of live panels, and then to accommodate some of the speakers we really wanted to be there, we also did some pre-recordings. So those were slotted into a live format, which was really, really great to be able to do. And then, from our perspective, worked really, really smoothly. And then we also, to try and facilitate some networking, we had some breakout sessions as well, where we focused on certain topics. People could sign up in advance or join at the time. And those we made sure that we could try and accommodate as much as possible in terms of access requirements, language requirements. And then those were there to sort of stimulate the discussions further and get people talking in person. So those were done in Teams meetings, which we had some learnings from as well in terms of trying to engage and stimulate discussion. I think it was quite difficult at times, but we did both the group discussions and then tried one-to-one sort of speed dating networking stuff, and that was definitely much harder. And we learned from that actually people just need a break. They don't want to attend every single bit, and that was really, really key learning for us.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it, when you've got so much content that you want to share, but it's about when an event is virtual, it's so much more intense than sort of being at a in-person conference where you're sort of after a session you're up and you're having a cup of coffee and chatting to people. So as you said, we sort of gave you some guidance on, and I think that this probably happens to a lot of people who have run in-person conferences for years, and they, it's a 2-day conference, but no, this is what we do. This is what we do, and we're just going to sort of move that. That's fine. We just move it all online, and we can have this, that, and the other. But actually, sort of from an accessibility point of view, from an attendee experience point of view, it's it's a long time to sit in front of your computer and to be sort of taking in content. So we sort of talked to you about the length of your sessions, didn't we? And sort of keeping them to a maximum of 45 minutes where we have panels. Also, sort of keeping, we suggest that for a panel, you might have a moderator and 3 speakers for a sort of 40 to 45 minute session. That pretty much works quite well, that format. We've had conferences where there have been sort of 6 people on a panel and in a 45-minute session, and it's one of those awkward situations where nobody gets to there isn't enough interaction because everybody just about has enough time to do their first question. So that was really really important. And I think also one of the key things that we sort of helped you with was appreciating that pre-recorded content is okay as well, because it sort of breaks up the format a bit, and it's content. Running a virtual conference, there's always a sort of element of fear from a technology point of view. That our Wi-Fi might break down, or a speaker might not be able to join. But just knowing that you've got a couple of bits of content pre-recorded up your sleeve gives everybody a bit of time to just breathe and know that the next couple of sessions are all good. I also really like the sessions where you had members of your team sort of doing presentations, and that sort of broke up the panel content as well. And also from a content point of view, the amount of speakers that you had from different countries and different experiences really was amazing. It was a truly diverse conference. And the other thing that you referred to as well is engagement. And so if we've got people's attention for quite a long period of time in a virtual environment, so you've got to keep them engaged. We don't want to just be sort of content going out. You want to hear back from them. You want to hear what they think. And clearly that's something that you get a lot in your in-person conferences. So we were sort of really helping to sort of push content in the chat, like you said. And I remember sort of getting to the end of day one and doing a download of all the Q&As and the chat and stuff. And it really was phenomenal, the engagement that you had. And also from a social media point of view, you saw it there as well, didn't you? The interaction.
Yeah, that was a really nice kind of last minute request we had that you kindly accommodated around the social media wall that we had, because then you could see how much was really going on in terms of conversation on social media and promoting what we were doing. It was a really nice aspect of the conference, I thought.
Yeah, it works well, doesn't it, when you can sort of bring in, we sort of brought up the social media wall in breaks and things like that to sort of encourage people to post on Twitter. Great. So my kind of last question for you is about the sort of, were you happy with the outcome of the conference? Obviously an enormous amount of work went into it from your team. It only comes around every 3 years for you, so it's obviously a very important event. So I'd love to know your learnings and how you felt the conference went for you guys.
Yeah, we're so happy we did it. We were so happy with how it went, and everyone came out of it just feeling so motivated to keep on doing what we're doing, and knowing what we're doing is really, really important. And I think one of the reasons why it was so successful was thanks to the regular meetings that we had with you over several months. We were meeting almost on a weekly basis and communicating probably on a daily basis. And, having joint documents where we were able to keep track of everything and progress. And, when speakers pulled out, how we were able to work to find solutions together. I think that was really, really helpful. And having the whole team involved and having access to that as well. It was also really good to have the possibility to have it available on YouTube, have it streamed on YouTube, because that meant for anybody who wasn't able to register in time, because we had a cutoff, they were able to access it on YouTube. And we know that we had a lot of people using that feed to watch the conference on both days. So that was really great. And probably attracted people that hadn't even really heard about the conference through our channels before. And then I think the main learning, as I sort of mentioned earlier, was about the networking opportunities and recognizing that this isn't as easy or even as attractive an opportunity when it's online. And a lot of people actually wanted to use those moments as a time to have a break, go outside, or sort something else they had to do with their job or whatever. So we had, in addition to the group discussions, the one-to-one networking opportunities, we had a social event at the end of day one, which was where we opened up a number of Teams meetings or chats to follow some of the UEFA games happening that night. And we had some people join them, but I think, as you mentioned before, everyone's just exhausted. And myself and the team were completely exhausted and still trying to stimulate these chats. And I think that was a learning for us, where actually this is a different event and you can't hold on to everything that you would try to do in an in-person event. So I think we would, if we do an online conference again, we would love to maintain or try and stimulate some type of social engagement or social activity, but we do it in a different way, and we've got to think about that really.
That end of the day slot is really hard, isn't it? Because in a in-person event, that's the time when everyone comes together and goes, oh, that was full on. Let's have a drink. Let's, whereas, it's always that's end of the day slot that sort of throws up issues in the virtual world.
Yeah, you're right, because usually, we'd have an evening of canapes and drinks, and we might show a game, or it would be a chance for people to carry on the discussions from that day and talk about things going on, talk about potential projects together. And if you do that without the canapes and the nice drinks in person, and you do it online, it just feels like more work meetings, which people need to have that rest. But that the conference itself, the content, etc., we were really, really happy with, and we're really glad we went ahead with that. What was really interesting is that we do a feedback survey after the conference to hear how people found it, what topics they found engaging, whether access requirements were accommodated, and if they would attend an online conference again. And from our survey, 20% said that they would want to have the conference online again. But I don't think that's a reflection of online conferences in general, or of the conference that we did hold together. I think it's just our stakeholders are really used to the conference being in person, and it's actually a really unique opportunity particularly for disabled football fans to come together from across Europe and exchange and talk about, actually, we've got an away match coming up, we'll meet up at the next away match and form those relationships. And that's a really rare opportunity. And also for those disabled fans to see UEFA in person, to see FIFA and ask them direct questions about accessibility. So I think it doesn't mean that we won't do an online event in the future, because 20% said they would prefer in person. I think it means that we need to make sure we keep on accommodating those desires to meet in person, whilst also creating online opportunities that expand our network globally and make sure that people can attend online if they can't attend in person as well.
One of the other sort of the key things that I take away from virtual events is the fact that you have all this amazing content sort of recorded, and it's got all the captions, it's got all the sign language, and you've got that to use and share so widely afterwards, which is great. That sort of content is invaluable, isn't it? And I think that's definitely one of the sort of benefits to virtual events, and like you say, being able to stream it out via YouTube as well was a real bonus for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you managed to send us all of the video content and the transcripts, etc., so quickly after the conference that meant whilst people were still talking about it, we could put that online, people could refer back to it. And as you said, it's there for us to use going on. And there are so many amazing sound bites from disabled people giving their feedback and their thoughts on accessibility within sports and what needs to be done. And we can keep referring back to those and reminding people of those statements and those calls to action, and we can integrate them into our own trainings as we go forward. So it's, like you said, it's such amazing content that we can continue to use for as long as possible.
Fantastic. Cool. I would just like to just talk about some of our sort of experiences from the conference from an Attendable point of view. And our learnings, because we've been doing this for about 18 months now, and it's and every event we do, we learn something new, which is incredible. And but one of the things we definitely took away from your conference, certainly one of the things you mentioned about sort of regularly meeting. So a lot of people come to us and sort of say, well, how will it work? How will you integrate with our team? And how will we work together? And we sort of try and explain that we can be as involved with your team as you like. But working with you guys, we had, like you said, we had the regular weekly meetings, followed up with emails, we had shared documents. That's how we like to work. That's sort of when we feel like we're sort of integrated with your team and working together as a team to deliver the event. That's how it works. And working with you and the team was just textbook from an Attendable point of view, which was really, it just sort of reconfirms that the processes work, which is really great. And the other thing that we haven't been able to do very often in our time as Attendable is we were lucky enough to be at a studio with our production team, which was fantastic because of COVID. We haven't been able to sort of go to different spaces and be in spaces together. But it was a real sort of eye-opener for Catherine and I, that to be on site with the production team, so that if any issues sort of arose, they were in the next door room and they could come and ask us, and and they're like, oh, our next speaker's not here. And we were there and we were able to deal with things immediately, as opposed to sort of being a phone call away in a remote, in our homes, and they were in a studio. So I think that was one of our key learnings, and also learning more about different suppliers. So we hadn't really worked. We looked into using Interprify for other clients before, but we hadn't sort of. I feel like we really put it to the test for your conference. And I think that's great. Every event we learn more about new platforms, new suppliers, and I think that's what Attendable can bring to organisations like yours when you're looking to make your events accessible and inclusive. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jo. I think it's clear to anyone that watches this showcase how much we enjoyed working on your event and delivering it. So thank you so much, and hope that we get to work together in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity and for helping us deliver this really successful event online.
Well, thanks, Sarah and Jo. That was a really interesting look back at how we delivered the Cafe 4th International Conference and made it accessible and also engaging. And a key element of that, which there wasn't time to cover in the conversation with Jo, was actually an award ceremony that we delivered as part of the conference itself. And at the end of the conference, we were absolutely thrilled, overwhelmed, and uncharacteristically speechless to be given an award for our commitment to accessible and inclusive virtual events. Sarah's just showed it to everybody there. So it was truly a fantastic end to 2021. And if you'd like to find out more about how you can make your next event accessible, inclusive, and indeed attendable, then please do get in touch via our website. We'd love to hear from you.